Deliver a presentation, and you'll find that audiences are more distracted than ever. It may seem like an impossible task to get their attention, but it all starts with being authentic, flexible, and empathetic. Let's have ourselves a pocket-sized pep talk because bots, algorithms, social media, they may be our competition when going after an audience's attention, but they can't reach people at a deep level, and they can't know them.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Gabe Zickerman, is an entrepreneur, author, investor, and leader whose books, speeches, and workshops focus on gamification and behavioral design. Companies such as Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon have adopted Gabe's theories and practices, leading to significant revenue increases over time. A frequent keynote speaker and speaking coach, he's helped hundreds of successful entrepreneurs, executives, and celebrities communicate beautifully in all settings. His new book is The AHA Method, Communicating Powerfully in a Time of Distraction. That title caught my eye. Nice to meet you, Gabe, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Rob. Glad to be here.
Outstanding. Well, you're talking to a grizzled presenter, so this should be interesting. but
I didn't notice your grizzle when we were first talking. So okay, there you go.
You're grizzle, you know.
There you go.
Listen, authenticity. I just think it's a hot topic, and it's powerful and appeals to an audience if you can pull it off. So I'll climb into how in a moment. Tell me what drove you to the topic.
Well, I've always been a really chatty person. Okay, so growing up, I think it actually says so I went by the name Gabby growing up as a kid, right? Gabriel's my name, but they called me Gabby. And my kindergarten teacher actually wrote in the margins of my kindergarten report card, "Never have I had a more aptly named pupil," in the context of Gabby being somebody who talks a lot. And I should have this on a shirt, or it probably will go on my tombstone or something like that. But this is, I've always been like a chatty person. And so all along I've been somebody who communicates a lot. And when I got my first jobs, my first sort of like corporate jobs, I started to get kind of put forward as a spokesperson relatively early on. And this was in the video game industry, where I became kind of the chief sort of PR person and then the voice for a whole big movement in video games. And I co-founded a company. And at one point I was the most quoted person in the world on video games, doing a ton of conferences, lots of media, all the big newspapers. We were really talking about this shift of games. So like my first thing was talking about the shift in video games from something that sad boys did in basements to something that grown people were doing. This was the change to casual games. Yeah. And so I was really the spokesperson for this. And along the way there, I just got a tremendous opportunity to do a ton of, professional public speaking, which had always come naturally to me, but, something where I got a lot of experience. And so, fast forward to now, which has been many years later, one of the things that I noticed was along the way, and I did all, these TED Talks, and I'm a very highly paid professional public speaker today and entrepreneur. But one of the things that I noticed along the way was like, I just don't think the old ways of thinking about public speaking, professional communication, pitching, I don't think they work in an environment where everybody is as distracted as people are today. It's like a completely different world. And can I just give you like a simple example of what I mean by this?
Yeah.
Okay. So, generally speaking, like old school, like yuck, Dale Carnegie, Toastmasters kind of public speaking, they teach you to start with some kind of like warm joke intro for, in your speech, right? Like the classic, I just flew in and boy, are my arms tired, right? And we've all heard the speaker who's done, something like that, or even just started with a thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad that we're here, starting with, housekeeping or whatever. You don't have that kind of time to keep people's attention. You literally have 8 to 10 seconds to establish your voice, your authenticity, and most importantly, the reason why people need to listen to you. You literally have 8 to 10 seconds to keep people's attention. They start predisposed to listening to you. And within the first 10 seconds or so, they'll drift off if you don't catch them correctly. So just as a simple example, there's no time at the beginning of a speech or a pitch for a soft talk, like, patter. That has to go. It has to go. We might be really uncomfortable, just get up there and start talking, but you have to. So that's just an example. I think today's audience has really changed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I remember in high school, we learned there's two types of presentations. There's persuasive and there's informative. And as I became a professional speaker, I thought, that's absolutely not true. There's only one type of presentation. It's persuasive. Even if I want to inform you, if I don't get those 10 seconds you're talking about, I've lost the audience. Why would you want to be informed? So, in sales, when we're dealing one-on-one, we call it a whiffum. What's in it for me? And in presentations, I think somewhere along those 10 seconds, better be interesting, compelling, and we better give them a need to listen, a need to learn. But where do they teach that? I don't see that in any of the certainly not in the school books that are out there.
And even when it comes to persuasion, because I think you hit on something very important. I talk about this in my book, The Aha Method. Every talk is persuasive. Every single conversation you have with anybody about anything, ever, anywhere, at the root, the thing you're trying to persuade somebody of is that they should believe you. You may not always be actively selling, but you're always selling yourself in every conversation, every interaction. So that kind of, misinformation from high school, that's not the only thing that bedevils speakers today. Another one straight out of high school was the whole, and college even, was the whole tell people what your hypothesis is, and tell them the 3 arguments you're going to make, and then recap the hypothesis. In today's environment, if you tell people up front what the punchline is, what the distillation of your whole speech or pitch is going to be in the first 10 seconds, they literally like, okay, I got the information I needed, and now I'm going to tune you out for the rest. You have to actually structure everything you do in persuasive communication more like the way television or movies are structured, with a 1, 2, 3 act structure that actually reveals what you're trying to say a little bit later on. It's the exact opposite of how we were taught to do rhetoric. People are still taught to do rhetoric in school. Yeah,
that model. Let's just put some dirt on it and bury it already. I think you're describing it. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. I was in 10th grade, and I already thought, this is lame. There's not enough here. What about telling somebody why, what's in it for them to learn, what we expect of them when we're done talking? Who the heck are we? What's the big picture of this presentation? Okay, what couple things will you be talking about? But Gabe, I also think we miss out on how are we going to talk about it? I mean, is there a quiz? Is there a test? There's so much different from the models that we had in school. And that's why I'm always eager to talk to somebody that's putting together books on real communication, because they're still stuck on that tell them model, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, it doesn't. In fact, I think also, you talked about authenticity at the start of the conversation. Just circling back to that for a second. So one of the things I talk about a lot, and I've done some coaching. I'll only ever do speaker coaching with people who I think are really exceptional. And so some of my mentees have gone on to be like on Shark Tank hosts, that kind of thing. So I generally tend to only take speaking mentees who are, have tremendous potential as speakers or entrepreneurs who are pitching or whatever. But one thing that I developed the methodology here by doing some of this coaching and thinking about how I approached it in 20 years or so of experience. And one of the first things that I learned that really I tried to distill down in the book was this idea that, there isn't one right way to be a public speaker. I think there's this idea, especially in the era of TED, and if you're doing pitching for your startup, so if you're pitching your startup, there's a whole different frame of reference. It's not TED, but more like, if you've seen videos of the Airbnb founders pitching their company, there's this whole idea of what a good pitch sounds like, and there's this whole idea of what a good talk sounds like, and what the speaker is supposed to sound like, and how their cadence is supposed to go, and when you're supposed to raise your voice and when you're supposed to lower it. And if any of you are interested in having a laugh There's that really funny TEDx talk by this guy, Will Steven, who makes fun of other TED Talks. It's called How to Sound Smart in Your TED Talk. It's very, very funny. It's basically a nonsense TED Talk. Anyway, the point is, starting from Dale Carnegie, starting in the 50s, going forward, we were trying to impress upon people that there's one right way to present. And I think that in this era of authenticity, when that's the most important thing that audiences look for now, in order to judge whether or not they should listen to you, okay? In this era of authenticity, it's super important to really be you. If you're not funny, don't try to be funny. If you're not an emotional, available person, if you're not a Brene Brown kind of like vulnerability-centered human being, don't try to be vulnerable. And, one of the things that I advocate for everybody to do is figure out kind of in this sort of quadrant that I've distilled down. Are you more funny? Are you more vulnerable? Are you more academic? Are you more strident? Are you more, demanding or prescriptive? And kind of based on where you are in your native personality, the goal is to, when you're speaking or pitching, to be the best version of that self, not the best version of what you think the absolute best kind of TED speaker might be.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, beautifully said, by the way. And I'm glad you said it. I think so many people confuse this line between style and technique. See, we're going to talk in a moment about some technique moves that will stylize. But mentors, and it's lovely to have a mentor, and I'm all for mentors, but sometimes mentors don't understand where they're separating style from technique. And that example you used for humor is a perfect example. There are, I've written about it. There's, I can give you over 40 ways to be interesting in front of an audience. Humor is one of them. There's nothing more pathetic than somebody clinging. But if the mentor is funny and says, and now here's where we tell a joke, well, it worked for the mentor, although I don't know anybody who leads into here's where we tell a joke, but that's another story. But works for the mentor, doesn't necessarily work for that mentee, but the mentee doesn't know. They're taking notes left and right and going, okay, I'm funny here. I deliver that there. And boy, it falls on deaf ears.
It actually also works the other way. So just taking it from the other perspective. So, and I noticed this as a pattern, particularly, and I'll say this in context, particularly with CEOs and other experts of color, and particularly with people, women, and people who are immigrants who have, accents. There tends to be an added layer there, and this is, difficult to decode. I'm a white guy if you're not watching this in person, but I'm also an immigrant. I'm a child, I'm a child of refugees. I'm a gay man, so lots of baggage, Jewish, lots of baggage. But again, I don't live in the world of being a female CEO of color. I've never been that, or being disabled or with an accent. But so for folks who come different than what they think the standard package is, one of the greatest risks of this, the negative side risk of this, is that they become so anxious about whether or not the audience will accept them the way they are, that they try to dial back their personality to fit into the most neutral or least confrontational version of themselves. And the way that this typically manifests, and I'm thinking about a particular person in mind who I adore. She's one of the most brilliant, amazing people ever. And, I watched her talk at an event, and her cadence was so, monotonous. And she was always speaking in the same tone of voice, and she was not really modulating and not changing her pace and all this kind of stuff. And what you could see was this, and we talked about it afterwards, you could see this fear that if she went out of bounds, that people wouldn't listen to her, because her bias is that people don't want to listen to an angry Black woman, okay, in this particular case. And one of the things that I always tell people, it's like, well, okay, are you an angry Black woman? If you're an angry Black woman, you need to be an angry Black woman in this presentation. As much as that feels like something you should not be, I'm not saying you should be that the whole presentation, but if that is the thing you need to be in order to be yourself and to communicate the thing you need to be, you got to be that. And what that means is, can we find a way to connect those things to the subject at hand, to the thing that you want to do, and make that something that people actually want to something that people actually want to listen to and deploy in the right way. It's definitely a balancing act. My mom, she has a thick accent. She's a refugee and she's a very, very thick accent. And, she always said that people would pass over her. They wouldn't listen to her. They thought she was dumb because of her accent. I can't tell you how many people with accents I've worked with or seen or talked to who believe the same way. If you walk up on stage believing that your accent is a negative to your ability to sell and be persuasive, it absolutely will manifest as that. So we got to make that, we got to find a way to turn these things into positives.
Yeah, I agree with you. The book's called The AHA Method, Communicating Powerfully in a Time of Distraction. I'm assuming we can get that online, Amazon, all the online outlets. No problem there.
Yeah, that's right. You can pick it up at your favorite local bookstore, your library, even.
Oh, the
Amazon.com.
library. The library. I love the library. I can't tell you how many
Me
emails I
too.
get from people who say, got your book into the library. And I have to tell you, I wince a little. I go, that's wonderful. That's just terrific. Now let's get a copy of our own if it's that good. But okay, the library, a wonderful place. It's such a simple statement I'm going to make to you, but we're going to slide into some authenticity. And I love the combination of both, by the way. Sort of, I was looking at you going, was this a presentation skills guy or an authenticity guy? And I went, gosh, how does one survive without the other? But when I'm working with people, one of the things I impress upon them is I say, one of the keys to being authentic in my mind, and then I want to hear your version, is tell the truth. You got to tell the truth. That story you just told about a woman of color, to me, one of the things I pulled out of that was, you want to be authentic up there. You have to be your truth yourself. And then people will find you authentic. And she was trying to be somebody she's not. That's where that style and technique line always makes me anxious, because somebody's trying to do a bad imitation of somebody else. That's just not going to fly.
Yeah. Well, just consider also what the landscape is that you're competing against. Okay.
Yeah.
So while you're up on stage, you're pitching, or you're just selling. Forget doing public speaking. You're just selling. Okay. Everybody who's sitting in the room listening to you, they've got a million other things they could be doing. They really are, and they're getting buzzed. Their phone is buzzing at them kind of constantly, right? Their watch is buzzing. They know their kids are at practice, and their spouse is trying to get their attention, and the world is trying to get their attention. And, there's such a landscape of content that you can consume. And one thing that you can say about content on social media, other than the constant kind of addictive little buzz, one thing you can definitely say is that the vast majority of social media content creators, they're definitely selling a specific vision of themselves and a specific frame of reference that they're going through. Whether that's real or not, it's definitely consistent associated with that persona. So people have increasingly been trained to view that polished speaker as being inauthentic, even if they are actually, that's what they're like. The more polished you are, often the more fake you seem. And so there's part of it as well with people are always like, well, what do I do if I make a mistake? And I'm like, you just keep going, because nobody's going to remember that you said or ah or or a grr, or you took a pause, or you used the wrong word. Like, no one's going to remember any of that stuff. But if you're overly rehearsed and you're overly polished, people will definitely walk away from that going, is that really that guy?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you a case study. When I first became a professional speaker, I went out there and I just celebrated my 30th year. I went out there and I was, kind of perfecting, almost like a stand-up, trying to get my routine down a little bit.
Sure.
And then I got into a rhythm, and then I got it. And I started noticing my evaluations, which had been going up, started coming back down again. And I couldn't for the life of me, Gabe, figure out what was wrong. I knew the answer to every question. Hint, hint. And I finally flew out another Xerox instructor, and I said, I don't understand what's going on. I have this thing down to a science. And he said, you're too well rehearsed. You've lost that connection to the audience. They don't know all the answers. Why do you know all the answers? And so the only lies I'll tell an audience from time to time, and I'm going to belly up to the bar and tell you I'm not ashamed of it. From time to time, I'll tell an audience I'm not sure of an answer that I know very well the answer to. but I can tell in a sense I'm feeling that I've answered just a few too many at this point, and it's time to take a step back and go, I'm not here to take guesses. I'll find that one out for you. We'll get it confirmed. Could be 11, but let me figure that one out for you. And that, particularly on an analytical audience, everybody calms down and says, now we can trust that guy. We see that he doesn't know everything. It's instinct versus logic, right, Gabe? The instinct is want to know everything. Logically, we don't want to know everything.
Yeah, and that makes me think a lot about like Q&A specifically, because I think a lot of people are there's one thing, working through the discomfort of like giving a presentation. Then there's a whole other layer where a lot of people then are like, well, I can't, doing Q&A, I can't do that. That's crazy. And, any kind of interaction with the audience just seems like extra daunting to people. And, I kind of want to hear your take on it, because I think I would enjoy a Q&A session with you a lot. One of the things that I have learned as a technique in Q&A is I will ask a question in response to the question. So, if I don't want to necessarily always give like a super clear answer, or if I'm also like not sure that I want to take the audience down a particular road. So if you say to me, isn't it bad that, is it bad that people are so distracted by their devices all the time, right? Isn't this a terrible shame? And, this lack of attention has really hurt society. And, I might say something like, well, when I was a kid, we were expected to sit down and listen to 90-minute, lectures from professors. That was the expectation. And we didn't have computers, and so we had to sit there, and we had a pad of paper and a pencil, and we were expected to fully pay attention. But you remember, we didn't fully pay attention either, right? I mean, we were doodling in our notebooks, and we were like sometimes talking to other people and passing notes back and forth. We didn't have the damaging, the device. It wasn't as obvious what we were doing, but we were clearly doing it. So the question is, how do we turn out?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so in my world, we call that, it took you a while, but sometimes we call that a reverse. Okay. Well, I'll do that when I'm in a training situation and I'm dealing with, sometimes we'll call them anxious dependence, but a person that's a little bit anxious. Well, my job is not to just put on a presentation, is to build you up and get you not to implement what we're doing. So I'm not doing anybody any favors answering all these questions that you've got the answer to, but you're a little insecure. So a compassionate reverse, or sometimes a relay. Gabe, really good point. How about you, Mary? What do you, and let that room work with it. The only thing, because you asked my opinion, the only thing that I'm really a stickler for when I'm working with people is to say, when you reverse, when you relay, particularly if you do it more than once, you've got to, I call it, put a cap on it. You can't just go, well, that's a good question, Gabe. How do you feel, Larry? Larry says the answer. Go, any other questions? No. You're the instructor. You're the presenter. So you've got to say, an outstanding point made there. I'm going to pick up 2 of that, 1 of that. And my suggestion is do this as well. In other words, finish it so that nobody's getting uncomfortable of, does he know the answer? So nobody has to be insecure. That's one of my approaches. But one real fast thing, that Q&A, the reason why Q&A scare me, and they do, scared is a big word. I don't really get scared, but make me anxious, is because, and I want everyone to hear this, is because the only thing that can really go wrong, we're not going to get sniped, is what if the audience doesn't have any questions? So we have that very uncomfortable, okay, are there any questions? Pause, which it could be 2 seconds. It's going to feel like 25 seconds to you. Is just a technique of mine. But what I do is I have a few questions all ready to go. And I'll turn my shoulders like I'm talking to me and go, all right, Rob, I got one for you. And I'll pull one of the best questions anyone could possibly ask so we can get something meaty. And I'll turn my shoulders, answer it, and go, you are a bright fella. I'm going to answer that for you. And the audience gets a little chuckle. We've cut the ice a little bit there. Now it's a little safer. Usually I can get one now. So we never have to worry about standing there looking somewhat pathetic, going in our mind, please, somebody, please.
First of all, I am actually, Rob, you need to do an entire podcast where it's literally just you talking to yourself, I would pay to see that. Do a live series of shows. I'm in the audience. That's a thing I would definitely watch. I think in general, like though in observation, like that is definitely the worst thing. And most you know, as is always the case, if you're doing a speech at an event, you know, if you're being invited to do a speech at an event, one of the important things, and I talk about this in the AHA Method, my book, is I have like a checklist of things with the event organizer that I go through. So even if they haven't gone through the checklist with me, I have this checklist, and I've got the checklist as an addendum in the book, and it's part of the like digital material, and it covers all of these questions. Like, do you want Q&A? How long do you want me to talk for? Are you going to have someone running the Q&A, or am I running it myself? Do people need to walk up to the podium to ask questions? Are their mic stationed? Are they calling out? All of these details, having a full 360 picture of everything that's going to happen in your talk from start to finish, understanding all the logistics. And by the way, this applies to more than just the Q&A. This is the stuff that happens beforehand as well. The setup, the technical setup, rehearsal time, all this kind of stuff. The more of those details you have written down, the more they're on your checklist, the more you can go through and say, okay, this is this. And the more comfortable you're going to feel that those details are not going to get in the way of your flow, which you talked about your flow before, right? So the key thing is minor details should not get in the way of your flow. And many amateur presenters or speakers are really concerned. Their main fear is that they're going to forget what they were going to say. That's, you know, I think you probably get that, right? It's going to freeze.
It's either forget or get sniped, you know, get a sniper out there.
Right.
I think that's pretty much
so
the big
rare.
two. Yeah. And it's
and that one is so
rare. Yeah.
We're not stand-up comedians. They have to deal with that all the time. You know, public speakers pitching, sales pitches, you rarely get that. So so it's this sort of like forgetting things. And one of the things that I've got all these techniques for memorization that I kind of adapted from other people that work very well for me. Someone who's not got a great memory, they work very well for me. But one of the things about it is like I want to reduce all of the known unknowns and the known knowns. I want to know all of those up front as much as I can. So I don't need to practice my talks on the official stage necessarily, but every time I'm given an opportunity to rehearse, I take it. Yeah. I'll walk up on that stage. I've done hundreds of them. You've done hundreds of them. I walk up on the stage. I want to see the clicker. I want to see what it looks like. I want to know what they expect of me. It's also for them. They need more rehearsal than I probably. Most of the people working are doing it less than I'm doing it. So I want them to also, have a moment of rehearsal and go through it. It's a little bit like the airplane security demo that runs at the start of every flight. Yeah. Most passengers think that's for the passengers, but it's equally for the flight attendants to be reminded every single time what they're actually supposed to do. There's a lot of 360 benefit in it. And the reason why all of that is really super important, and the reason why I tell people not to worry about forgetting what you do if you learn good memorization techniques, is because there's actually like much bigger things to worry about in a talk. And the most important thing to worry about in a talk is, did the audience understand what it was that you wanted them to understand?
Yeah.
The only thing that matters, are they picking up what you're putting down?
Right.
Like literally, that's it. The whole thing is a goal to get them to the point of clarity of understanding, whether they agree with you or disagree with you. Did you deliver what you needed to deliver? Do they understand you? And in order to accomplish that, they have to believe in you. They've got to pay attention. You need to execute all the things that you need to execute. But once you've got that North Star, so many other things are no longer as important and significant as they seemed before.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gabe. And I think, if I stack rank the 50 biggest mistakes that presenters make, I would say there's one that dwarfs the other 49. It relates to what you just said, which is almost always too much information.
Too much.
We're standing in front of a mirror. We got 4 pages and we're saying that's an hour. And we talk ourselves out of it. And then we can't execute what you just said, which is the beauty, the perfect presentation. Is why it takes us professional speakers a little while. We're not going to tell you to get our rhythm down. No professional is going to tell you this is my first time or third time. That's an amateur move. Yeah. But we have first times too. What we're trying to do is get that balance between enough information without overloading you, so you can do exactly what you just said. Walk out of here, implement. Tell yourself, it was like seeing a good movie. I laughed, I cried, it was dramatic. I remember when I saw the movie Iron Man, none of the others, just the first one. I thought that's like the perfect presentational months. I laughed, it was dramatic, it was interesting, it was technically, it was like a bouquet of flowers. That's the way I want a presentation. I want all those little elements, but don't want to bury the lead. I want what you just said, which is I got to get that balance of content and rhythm so that I don't overload them. And this wine is breathing. These people are able to ask questions.
Yes,
slow down and put them in a small group. Turn your shoulders and have 20 seconds of that. What do you see over here? How would you respond to that over there? But when we crowd that presentation, we just keep piling. We hit our mark, but the audience walks out dizzy.
Yeah. I tried to bring a little bit of scientific rigor to that idea of the kind of rhythm and the flow in the AHA method, because I have kind of a behavioral science background. So that's sort of my frame of reference. And I actually have a thing in the book, which is I think many people find interesting, which is sort of like a graph of the emotionality in a talk. And the reason why I called it the AHA method was because I talk about these aha moments in talk, the maximum sort of crescendo of emotional energy and intellectual energy. It's that stimulation moment where the hairs stand up on the back of your neck because the speaker has said something and it just really lands. You don't always agree with it, right? But it's something where you're like, aha, okay, that's a thing. Now, to your point, once you understand that every meaningful, persuasive conversation has those moments in it, those big rousing moments when it's a political talk, right? It's where people get up and start clapping, okay? But in our world, it's those moments where you're really connecting with the audience at the maximum point. To your point, one of the first mistakes that people always make is too much information. Too many of those is as bad as not enough of those. And not only that, but each one of those aha moments, those crescendos, must be followed by a refractory period in which the person is given some time to absorb and digest the thing that you've just said. Because in a presentation context, just like in this, interview in this podcast right now, we are, you and I are speaking fluidly. We're not pausing. The listener could be pausing to digest what we said, but they're listening fluidly. If I pepper you with ABC, really important things like back to back, you're not going to be able to remember all three of them. You won't have had a chance to convert them into long-term memory. That's part of how our brains work. You need a little bit of time to digest and assess that. So you have to space those crescendo moments apart. Those aha moments have to be spaced apart. Frankly, you need to fill time between them with things. You've got to allow people to come off that high with something that's less important that they don't need to pay as much attention to so they can absorb it, and then build back in that direction. And because of people's distraction, you also need to indicate that those moments are approaching by changing, modulating tone, pacing, all this kind of stuff, so that if people you have lost them and they're a little distracted, that they come back to you because your voice is getting louder and you're getting more staccato and you're bringing attention to the thing that you're saying. So there's like some behavioral science stuff in there that I think is meaningful, and I think we can break down and make more process oriented. Maybe it came more naturally to you and I, like we weren't trained in this discipline. But if you're not naturally, and you don't have 20 years or 30 years, 30 years to refine, that was one of the goals with the AHA method.
Yeah. By the way, it's 40. I was 10 with Xerox.
Wow.
The Zoom camera does nice things for us all. But in any case,
I need your camera though. You gotta post what camera it is in the link. Everyone needs to see that.
I promise it's only on the first level of filter. I promise. And it defaulted at it. It defaulted. I never touched it. All right. Boy, that's a lot to unpack there. We were talking about some of the worst things that could happen. And, it's interesting. I don't get to talk to real seasoned pros like you. And so I'm sitting here basically nodding my head to everything you're saying, which not the greatest host in the world, but I can't disagree with anything you're saying. It's just there's so much, again, instinct versus logic. You need ring work. That's what I tell speakers. It's like a boxer. You just need to get up on that, in that pit as a trainer or on that stage as a keynote speaker, and work out that rhythm. Even that, what you said in terms of walking around, getting in there early. People always think there's one answer to bringing down anxiousness. It's not. There's so many little things that can happen. They bundle together and they form this big blob that's sitting on your shoulders. When you've walked the room, when you know where the hot spots are, you know how you're going to enter and exit that stage. When you've made shake hands with the AV people on the back table.
Yes,
all those
100%. Always do that.
Yeah, they just begin to peel layers off. So it's not one, it's a collection of. And that's why you look for coaches like Gabe, and you read books like Gabe's, because what that's going to do is it's going to start peeling some layers off that onion. Even what we're talking about, how to start, which you were going at, how to handle a Q&A, which is right at the end. We fumble that. We've had a wonderful 59 minutes. We walked off with, well, okay. Anyway, that's Gabe. Real fast.
What can I tell you?
Just a real quick technique on that, because I'm going to ask you for one or two of your nightmares. One of mine is, and I've figured out a way around it, is that Q&A at the end, when we've just brought this audience to just right where we want them, and the customer said, "Now I want a 5-minute Q&A," and so here comes the Q&A. It's a little clunky, it's a little bumpy. All right, I turned my shoulders, asked a few questions, and then I'm sort of pushed off stage. Well, I've always heard we finish with our best trick. We start with our second best trick, but we finish with our best. I'm encouraging people to don't let go of the mic quote so fast. While there's a hand on your shoulder, it's okay to say, "Thanks, Mr. Martin. And I would like to leave with one last story, if I may. And now go to it, finish it, come off that balance beam and stick your landing, but don't get shuttled off right after that Q&A. It feels clunky to me. And I'm so a little more aggressive on those.
I love that technique. You know what I do? My basic strategy for the whole thing, I'm very good in the Q&A. So for me personally, I work it the way that I want to work it. But my basic strategy for everyone is whatever timing the organizer wants me to speak is almost always too long. So what I do is up front, I negotiate myself down in terms of my time slot. And so if they say, "Okay, we want you to do 60 minutes and 15 minutes of Q&A, I'll be like, "That's too long. Nobody's going to listen to me for more than 40 minutes. So how about we make the whole block 55 minutes, and I'll give you 40 minutes of talk and 15 minutes of Q&A." By shortening the whole thing, now we don't want to shorten all the way down to 6 minutes. Don't force yourself to do a Pecha Kucha or short TED style if you don't have to do that, because they're very, very hard to get to really nail. But within reason, 30 or 40 minutes plus time for Q&A, I feel like I leave the audience really wanting more. And the shorter my talk is, the more likely it is that there's going to be good questions in the talk, because I will purposely omit things in that 40-minute talk that I know are going to be on people's minds, especially if I'm leaving things out which are more ethics questions, thorny questions, ethics questions, moral questions, futurist questions. Leaving some of those hanging makes it easier for the audience to pick that up and say, "Hey, well, what about this? Or is it okay to use it in this way?" or whatever.
Yeah, that's smart. I'll swap one other piece back at you. A lot of times for professional speakers, and so I'm speaking to those that really want to step it up a little bit. A keynote opens the door. A workshop is how we work with a company. And I'm very careful whether it's 40 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever that number is. We have to be careful because the clients will frequently use the words, "Yes, we're looking forward to your training." And I am a stickler. Right. I'll say keynote. I'm not training 500 people in 40 minutes with a Q&A. I'm going to give a phenomenal keynote. When we train, that's when we work with 20 people and we've got role plays, case studies, simulations. That's where we change the culture of an organization. But it seems like just a little word there. Oh, we'll just, word swap it. No, I'm not really training 500 people for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
You know,
And
so.
the price is really different
Well, yeah,
for those two
and
things.
we get to hang around a little bit and really see
Yeah.
our goal through. You know, as a
Yeah.
sales trainer, I 40 minutes I can entertain, inspire, motivate, and teach you one or two good things. But if I want to teach that company how to sell, it won't be 40 minutes in front of
Sure.
500 people. But the
Sure.
customers get confused about that. They're not manipulating, they're not doing it on purpose. So I'm encouraging everyone, make sure you don't misuse that word. You're delivering a keynote. You know, my dad used to call, you know, here's my boy, the motivational speaker. He used to drive me up a wall because I kept thinking of Chris Farley and, no, Dad,
Yeah,
I
sure.
teach. I'm better than that. And then in the end, I was like,
You're
man,
not in a van.
you can inspire,
Yeah.
and I'm that guy. But keynotes really are they're entertaining, they're enjoyable. There's some couple of really good ideas there. Let's do something they've never seen before, but never confuse that with training.
They should always, and they should always leave the audience wanting to come to you and ask questions, engage with you, and ideally hire you to do other stuff. So at
Yeah,
the end of a training, so like at the end of a training, the audience should be exhausted in my view, because I pushed them, I've made them do stuff, they've used all of their intellectual capacity, 100% of their capacity to do the things that I need them to do. And at the end of the day, I want them to feel tired, like we did a workout together, and they want to go home and they want to rest, and then they want to approach the day differently. At the end of my keynote, I don't want the audience to be tired. I want the audience to be wired. I want them to have energy. And then I want that energy that I've given them, or I've excited in them, or I've inspired them to feel. I do want leads from that audience to come to me and say, hey, well, how do we take that and turn that into, something else? Let's do another one of these. Let's do a workshop. Best marketing for me as a speaker or author is the speeches I give,
yeah,
bar none. The
me too.
keynotes I give, I should say.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But look, you can look at my website and watch this. Everybody's got a website, a book under their arm, things like that. The beauty
Yeah.
about professional speaking or training or just presenting, we're not, you don't all have to be professionals out there. But the beauty of giving a presentation is if it's good, everybody knows it. And if it isn't
Yeah,
good,
that's right.
everybody knows it. But there's no politics to presentations. And that's what I love about this profession. I was never the greatest political person at Xerox. I learned how to get my gear to fit into everybody else's gear, but it wasn't easy. That's the
Yeah.
joy of presenting. Gabe, I could talk to you for another hour, but I want to bring us in for a landing. But I've been hovering on this question because
Yeah.
of sort of the thing that would make you most uncomfortable, or just something that your particular presentation nightmare. Maybe if we out that one, I'll out one on my own, maybe. And how we resolve it. Maybe we calm everybody down who's listening. So give me that nightmare.
Okay. Well, I've been in a few kind of situations that I think for most speakers would be really sort of difficult to deal with. And so it's hard to not tell these stories and sound self-aggrandizing, but I'll tell you my favorite one, the one that tends to freak people out the most. So I'm giving a presentation at a conference in Mexico City, and this is a big trade show and conference, and they're using one giant hall. Okay, the conference section is on one side of the hall, the trade show is on the other section, and between the two is kind of the place where you go to eat and services area, whatever. But they're kind of open to each other, so they're not very well insulated from each other. So I'm doing a keynote. It's about 1:30 in the afternoon. I get up to get started on my keynote, and I start going into it, and the audience is a full audience, and the audience is listening to me. And then all of a sudden, I come to find out a full 18-piece mariachi band starts up in the food hall. They are so loud. I mean, this is a full mariachi band, double, triple the size of a normal one. This band is so loud that it is everywhere. It is in my talk. And the people listening to me, many of them were doing simultaneous translation. So they're listening to somebody translating. So it's extra difficult because it's kind of loud. I'm speaking, there's translation, and now there's the mariachi. And, I'm talking, and the mariachi starts, and I'm like, okay. And, because I know enough about mariachi, I'm like, this is not just they're testing their instruments. They're going to play a full song, right? And it's not going to be avoidable. And I keep talking, and I notice that the audience can hear them, because I can see people in the audience like removing their headsets and looking around and seeing where the mariachi is coming from. So I know that the audience is is listening to the mariachi. And so what I did was the next opportunity, I just kept talking, right, as though nothing was going on. And at the very next opportunity, logically, I worked a joke about mariachi music into my talk. It was not at all the part of the plan for this speech, but like I worked a mariachi joke into the thing, and I was like, and and I started to dance, and I made some kind of comment about how much mariachi music was engaging. It was a conversation about engagement, a keynote about engagement, and I'm like, one of the most engaging things, of course, is mariachi music, which everybody loves. But I'm not a very good dancer, though. At the end of this keynote, once we're done together, if you'd like to see me dance to this music, I will, in fact, stand up here and dance. The audience gets a really good laugh out of it. We all know that we're on the same page about it. I've promised them a payoff if they pay attention to me for the next little while, a jokey sort of payoff. And now we're in the clear to kind of keep moving forward. At the core of my response, this is why I said I'm going to sound self-aggrandizing when I say it, because it's like, it's such a big interruption, that for most people, I think it would be really frightening. And it was scary and difficult for me too. I'm not going to lie. Like there was definitely like the whole thing is getting derailed here. The thing that I tell everybody is, if you feel truly comfortable in yourself and you feel truly comfortable in the material, so if both of those things are true, you're authentically yourself and you're comfortable in yourself, you're authentically core and grounded in the material, and you know the material backwards and forwards, then just like any conversation between two people taking place at a cocktail party, you can pivot. Yeah. And you can acknowledge this interruption, have fun with it, or even integrate it into the conversation. Let everybody know that you're connected and keep going. It is entirely possible for you to do. But in order to do that, you have to be grounded in both. And that's why in the book, in the AHA method, I'm so kind of like content, as you sort of put it, right? Sort of content and technique focused at the same time, because I think you have to have both. Both are required in order for you to be truly good at this. And, I hope you never have to get played off by a mariachi band, but if you do, if you're comfortable in yourself and your material, you'll be able to handle it.
Yeah, a great story. And I'm not going to swap a story with you. I like that one just the way it is, but I'm going to give you kind of my moral of your story. I think the biggest nightmare, one of the biggest, catch me on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, my nightmares change, but,
might be different, yeah.
As we're talking right now, I think one of the worst things that can happen to a speaker is to make the audience feel sorry for them.
Yes,
you
right.
never want the audience to feel sorry for you. If it doesn't bother you, it won't bother them. So one of the morals I hear in your story, if just working and listening, is you didn't allow that to bother you. And because you didn't allow it to bother you, you actually used it. It was no longer an impediment. It no longer was in the way. If you had done what some people do, which was to put your hands over your jaw and say, "Oh my, this is going to be a challenge. I came all this way." I mean, I hope everyone, now you have an audience that feels sorry for you, and it's like a movie. You just took them right out of the movie, and you're looking around saying, "When does this end? And how do I find my car and get home?" The movie's over. So for everyone there, remember that story you just heard. And remember, the moral is no matter what happens to you, you trip over a cord, you drop something, a bulb goes out, this and that, roll with it. If you roll with it, not only will they smile, it won't be an issue, they'll remember you for that. That if I was in the audience, that would have been one of my favorite presentations because of the way you dealt with it. So I think that's the moral of the story.
Thank you. I agree with you. I think that's a very, very good moral.
Perfect. Well, we are talking about this book, which you'd be a nut not to get, because you got all kinds of ahas here, but the AHA method, communicating powerfully in a time of distraction. Ooh, there's a lot of distractions out there. How do people get a hold of you, Gabe?
Okay, so the easiest way to find me, because my name's Gabe Zickerman, I'm actually really easy to find on the internet. I'm the only one. I generally tell people you can follow me on LinkedIn. Typically, if you type in Gabe and then Z or ZI, I come up in whatever search system you want to look at. But you can also find me at gabezickerman.com.
Good. And that's Zichermann. But I like the fact that all we have to do is get it started. And it seems like Gabe owns the Gabe Z world. Good for you. I guess there aren't a whole lot of people piling on there. Anyway, listen, books at Amazon, go grab that book and put a nice comment on that book. Write a nice review. Amazon likes that, and we authors like it as well. Gabe, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. Learned a little bit, swapped a couple stories with another pro, which is always fun. And can't thank you enough for being on the show. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everyone. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.